Good evening, and welcome back.
Long before the word samurai carried meaning, before steel armor glimmered beneath the sun, before oaths of loyalty were sworn in candlelight, Japan was still finding itself. It was a land of quiet valleys and ancient mountains, of mist rolling across rice fields and rivers that shimmered under the moonlight. As always, I'd love to know where are you listening from and what time you are now down below in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Whether you're settling in for the night or just curious about where these legends came from, I'm glad you're here. Don't forget to subscribe and share it to someone who loves it too. In these peaceful landscapes lived the Heian nobility, the elegant courtiers of Kyoto. They were poets, musicians, and dreamers, more concerned with ink and silk than steel and blood. Life in the capital was refined, orderly, and slow. But beyond its gates, in the countryside, life was harder, rougher. And there, something new was taking shape. Bandits stalked the roads between provinces. Small lords, known as daimyos, quarreled over rice fields and water rights. And as the court's influence began to fade with distance, someone had to bring order, to defend the farmlands, to protect the shipments of grain, to guard the weak from the desperate. And so, from necessity, a new kind of man emerged. Not an aristocrat, not a monk, but a warrior, a man who served. They were called saburao, attendants, to serve. That was their meaning, their purpose. They served the great clans who owned the land, enforcing their will, defending their honor, and living by a simple truth, that loyalty was stronger than blood. These early warriors lived in the frontier zones between civilization and wilderness. They learned to ride horses, to fire arrows from horseback, and to strike swiftly in battle. They valued precision, endurance, and calm. Over the years, these small bands of armed retainers began to form tight circles around powerful families. Among them, two names rose above all: Taira and Minamoto. Both descended from emperors, noble by blood, yet hardened by distance from the court. In time, their clans became more powerful than the imperial officials they once served. The court in Kyoto looked on, perhaps too late, as real power began to slip away into the hands of those who wielded the sword. Still, this was not yet the full bloom of samurai culture. There were no codified laws of Bushido, no poets praising the way of the warrior. Honor then was simple: loyalty to one's lord, devotion to one's duty, courage in the face of fear. A samurai's worth was not measured by birth, but by what he could do for the one he served. To fail one's master was a shame worse than death. To die with courage was to live forever in memory. As time passed, the lands grew restless. Factions formed, borders blurred, and skirmishes flared across the provinces. The Minamoto and Taira clans began to clash openly, their banners fluttering like flames on the wind. One sought glory, the other dominance. And though they both claimed loyalty to the emperor, their true allegiance lay with power and survival. The Heian court, distracted by poetry and ritual, could only watch as the countryside burned. The once golden empire of culture and peace had given birth to something entirely new. A world ruled not by scholars or priests, but by the sword. From these early conflicts, the warrior spirit hardened. Men learned that honor could not exist without sacrifice, that discipline was a weapon sharper than any blade, that loyalty was the armor that shielded one's name from the winds of history. And so the samurai began to rise, not as mere servants, but as a class unto themselves. They were the bridge between chaos and order, the living embodiment of the will to survive with dignity. Their swords, the early taichi, were curved for cutting from horseback. Their armor, simple yet elegant, reflected both function and faith. They believed that every action, every breath, every death should carry purpose. By the late 12th century, the tension had become unbearable. The Minamoto and Taira clans were no longer content to whisper in the court's ear. They marched, and Japan was plunged into a war that would decide who truly ruled the nation. The Genpei War was on the horizon, a storm that would sweep away the old order and forge a new one in its place. But for now, the air is still. The sun sets over the fields. A lone rider stands at the edge of a quiet river, his reflection trembling on the surface. His armor hums softly as the wind passes through the reeds. In his heart burns something timeless, a silent vow to serve, to fight, to die well. The dawn of the samurai has arrived.
The dawn has passed, and the land of Japan now breathes a different kind of air, one heavy with tension, pride, and destiny. From the mist of the provinces, two great banners now rise. On one side, crimson and gold, the proud symbol of the Taira clan, descended from the emperors themselves. On the other, white and indigo, the Minamoto, equally noble, equally fierce. Their rivalry will shape the soul of Japan. For generations, both clans served the imperial court as guardians and soldiers. But as the capital's strength waned, these families no longer waited for orders from Kyoto. They became rulers in their own right, gathering land, armies, and loyalty. The emperor, cloaked in ceremony, remained the symbol of heaven's authority. Yet in the provinces, it was the sword that spoke loudest. The Heian court, still lost in poems and perfumes, did not see it coming. The balance of power was shifting quietly beneath their feet. When the Taira, led by Taira no Kiyomori, rose to dominance, even the emperor himself became little more than a figure in Kiyomori's shadow. The Taira controlled the court, the provinces, the flow of wealth. Their ships ruled the inland sea. Their influence reached every noble house. But power invites envy, and envy breeds rebellion. Far to the east, the Minamoto clan watched, patient, calculating. They had once been defeated, exiled from the capital, their leaders slain or scattered, but exile hardened them. Their sons grew up in the provinces, closer to the earth, closer to the warriors who tilled it. They learned the patience of the hunter, the quiet resilience of the farmer, the precision of the archer. While the Taira feasted in Kyoto, the Minamoto trained in silence. They waited for the moment when fortune would turn. And it did. In the year 1180, the flame of rebellion was lit by a prince of the imperial line, and the Minamoto answered his call. Across the mountains, warriors took up their bows, their armor, their long swords. Villages emptied. Brothers parted ways, some to the Taira, others to the Minamoto. Families split in half as Japan plunged into the Genpei War, a 5-year storm of blood and honor. Battles unfolded not just on open plains, but across rivers, mountains, and seas. The Taira, masters of the west and of the sea, fought with elegance and cunning. The Minamoto, born of the rugged east, fought with patience and endurance. Their strategies reflected their natures, the Taira swift and proud, the Minamoto steadfast and unyielding. The fighting was brutal, but ritualistic. Each side would announce their name and lineage before striking. Arrows would be loosed like prayers, each shot meant to honor both the living and the dead. And when two champions met on the field, they bowed before engaging in combat, as if to remind the heavens that even in war, respect remained sacred. One by one, strongholds fell. Rivers ran red, and the songs of the court grew quiet. But amidst the violence, legends were born. Men like Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a fierce and impulsive general whose ambition burned as brightly as his sword, and Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the younger brother, brilliant, graceful, and doomed to tragedy. Yoshitsune's victories became the stuff of legend. He crossed mountains thought impassable, struck the Taira when they least expected it, and brought them to their knees in a series of stunning battles. At Danurara, in the narrow straits of the inland sea, the two great clans met for the final time. Waves crashed, arrows flew, and as the tide turned, the Taira fleet was crushed beneath the weight of destiny. The Emperor Antoku, only 6 years old, was carried into the sea by his grandmother, a tragic act to preserve imperial honor. As the water closed above them, so too ended the age of Taira. When the smoke cleared, the Minamoto stood victorious. They had not only defeated their greatest rivals, they had changed Japan forever. No longer would the emperor's court rule directly. From now on, the true power of Japan would rest in the hands of its military leaders.
In 1192, Minamoto no Yoritomo established a new government, the Kamakura shogunate. It was a quiet revolution, one that began not with fire, but with discipline. The emperor remained a divine symbol, untouched and eternal. But behind the curtain, the shogun, the supreme military commander, now ruled the land. This was the birth of the samurai's world, a society built not on bloodlines of the court, but on service, duty, and strength. The warrior class had become the backbone of the nation. They would live and die by the sword, bound by the unspoken promise of loyalty and sacrifice. And yet, even in victory, shadows linger. For the Minamoto, unity would not last. Rivalries would soon tear even brothers apart. But for now, in the stillness after centuries of chaos, Japan finally rests under the watchful eyes of its warriors. The age of the clans is over. The age of the samurai has truly begun.
And as you drift further into the calm, you can almost see them, shadows moving beneath the rising sun. Men of honor, born from necessity, destined to shape centuries of history. The servants who would become legends. When the storm of war finally settled, the world that emerged was new, quieter, heavier, and built upon the discipline of the sword. It was the late 12th century. The great city of Kyoto still stood in shimmering grace, but true power no longer lived within its walls. It had shifted east to a modest coastal town called Kamakura, where a man named Minamoto no Yoritomo now ruled not as a nobleman, but as something entirely new, a shogun. Under Yoritomo, the samurai stepped out from the shadows of the court. They were no longer mere servants of the nobility. They were the nobility. Land was granted in return for loyalty. Titles were earned not through poetry or bloodline, but through service and valor. The emperor, distant and divine, remained a symbol of heaven's order, but the real order of men was forged here, in the shogun's court, among warriors who bowed not to crowns, but to honor. Kamakura itself was a city unlike Kyoto. No gold leaf palaces, no perfumed gardens. It was simple, made of wood and stone, surrounded by green hills and the sound of the sea. A place that reflected the samurai spirit, disciplined, humble, and enduring. From this quiet seat of power, Yoritomo built a system of governance that would define Japan for the next 700 years, a rule of warriors, by warriors. Provincial lords, daimyos, managed the land under the shogun's command. Their retainers, the samurai, kept peace, collected taxes, and fought in times of war. It was an age when a man's word was binding as steel, when a written oath could shape the fate of a province. And with this structure came something deeper, an unspoken moral code, a way of living that began to give shape to what would one day be known as Bushido, the way of the warrior. Bushido was not a single book or law. It was a spirit, an understanding, to live with courage, to act with honesty, to remain loyal even in death. A samurai's honor became his soul, invisible but heavier than his armor. They lived by restraint,
by simplicity. Their homes were sparse, their clothing plain, and yet their minds were sharp, their discipline absolute. They studied archery, swordsmanship, poetry, and Zen. They learned that mastery of the body was meaningless without mastery of the heart. For a time, the land prospered. Trade returned, temples flourished, and farmers worked under the protection of their samurai lords. But peace never lasts forever, not in a land forged by steel. In the late 1200s, a distant empire turned its gaze toward Japan. Across the sea, in China and Korea, the Mongols had conquered nearly all of Asia. Their Khan, Kublai, grandson of Genghis, demanded Japan's submission. And when the shogun refused, the sea itself began to tremble. The Mongols came like thunder. Armored ships darkened the horizon, their drumbeats echoing across the waves. For the first time, the samurai faced an enemy unlike any they had known. The Mongol warriors fought not in single duels of honor, but in coordinated ranks with volleys of arrows, smoke bombs, and thunderous explosions. The samurai, bound by tradition, charged bravely, but were shocked by the brutality of these tactics. The first invasion, in 1274, struck Kyushu, fierce and fast. But then, as if the heavens themselves took sides, a storm rose from the sea. Winds howled, ships shattered, and thousands of invaders drowned beneath the waves. The samurai called it kamikaze, the divine wind, a gift from the gods that had saved Japan. 7 years later, the Mongols came again, stronger, with hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of soldiers. For weeks they battled along the shore, but once again, as the fighting reached its height, the sky darkened, winds tore through the fleets, the sea rose and swallowed the invaders whole. The samurai watched from the cliffs as their enemies vanished into the storm. The divine wind had returned. Japan was safe, but victory came with a quiet cost. The warriors who defended the nation expected reward, land, gold, recognition. Yet there was no new territory to claim, no spoils to divide. And so discontent began to ripple through the ranks. Samurai who had given everything for honor found themselves struggling for survival. Their loyalty tested not by war, but by the peace that followed it. Yoritomo was long gone, his heirs weak and manipulated by powerful regents. The old once united warrior government began to crack from within. Ambition whispered again, as it always does. And soon Japan would find itself facing a new kind of conflict, one not between foreign invaders, but among its own. But even as politics shifted and loyalty faded, something lasting had been born. The samurai had discovered a way to live and to die that gave meaning beyond power. Bushido, though not yet named, had taken root in their hearts, a code of silence, of discipline, of service, a quiet strength that would carry them through centuries of chaos yet to come. And as night settles over Kamakura, the warriors rest in their wooden homes, their armor neatly hung, their swords cleaned and placed beside them. They breathe deeply, knowing that even in uncertain times, their purpose is clear: to serve, to protect, to endure. The age of order has begun, but beneath the still surface, the next storm is already forming. In 1192, Minamoto no Yoritomo established a new government, the Kamakura shogunate. It was a quiet revolution, one that began not with fire, but with discipline. The emperor remained a divine symbol, untouched and eternal. But behind the curtain, the shogun, the supreme military commander, now ruled the land. This was the birth of the samurai's world, a society built not on bloodlines of the court, but on service, duty, and strength. The warrior class had become the backbone of the nation. They would live and die by the sword, bound by the unspoken promise of loyalty and sacrifice. But even in victory, shadows linger. For the Minamoto, unity would not last. Rivalries would soon tear even brothers apart. But for now, in the stillness after centuries of chaos, Japan finally rests under the watchful eyes of its warriors. The age of the clans is over. The age of the samurai has truly begun.
The Kamakura shogunate had stood for more than a century, a world built upon the discipline of warriors and the quiet order of the sword. But even the strongest armor cracks with time. By the early 1300s, the once stable system began to crumble. Greed, ambition, betrayal. These were the new weapons that tore through Japan, sharper than any blade. In the capital, the emperor, long a figurehead, began to stir. He looked upon the shogunate's power and saw his divine authority diminished. Among the courtiers, whispers began to spread of restoring the emperor's rule, of returning to a time before the samurai's iron grip. That emperor's name was Go-Daigo. He dreamed of taking back what his ancestors had lost, a dream that would plunge Japan into decades of chaos. In 1331, Go-Daigo rebelled against the Kamakura regime. He was captured, exiled, but not defeated. Loyal warriors rose in his name, men who saw in him a chance for both honor and power. Among them was one whose name would be remembered for centuries, Ashikaga Takauji. Takauji was born a samurai, raised in the old ways. He fought bravely for the shogunate until he didn't. When he saw the weakness of his masters, he turned his sword toward them instead. His rebellion toppled the Kamakura government, and for a brief, shimmering moment, the emperor's dream came true. The throne restored, the shogunate dissolved. But ambition has many faces. Go-Daigo wanted divine rule. Takauji wanted stability, and perhaps destiny. When the emperor refused to share power, Takauji marched upon Kyoto, drove him from the capital, and founded a new military government, the Ashikaga shogunate. A second shogunate dynasty was born. Its seat of power, Muromachi, a district in Kyoto. Unlike Kamakura's simplicity, the Muromachi era shimmered with art and beauty. While war simmered in the provinces, Kyoto bloomed with culture. Tea ceremonies, ink painting, flower arrangement, all were refined beneath the watchful eyes of the samurai elite. The sword and the brush now shared the same hand. Even as castles burned in distant valleys, the capital dreamed in gold leaf and silk. The Ashikaga shoguns ruled for over 2 centuries, but power, once fractured, is difficult to mend. The emperor's loyalists, still bitter, never forgot their defeat. Rival clans grew bold, and the shogunate, weakened by internal strife, lost its grip on the provinces. By the mid-1400s, tension had turned to open war. In 1467, Kyoto itself became a battlefield. It began with a dispute over succession, a simple question of who would be shogun next. But that question ignited one of the longest and bloodiest civil wars in Japanese history, the Onin War. For 11 years the capital burned. Temples collapsed. Families fled. And among the ashes, Japan splintered into 1,000 warring states. Local lords, the daimyos, now ruled their territories as independent powers. They built castles, raised armies, and pledged allegiance only to themselves. The Ashikaga shoguns remained in name, but their rule was hollow. The land had descended into chaos. And yet, in this darkness, something remarkable bloomed. From the ruins of Kyoto rose new art, new philosophy, new ways of seeing the world. Zen gardens were raked to perfection, symbols of stillness amid ruin. Poets wrote verses of impermanence, of falling leaves and fleeting lives. The samurai, even as they fought, began to see beauty in transience, to find peace in the inevitability of death. This was the paradox of the samurai soul: to destroy, yet to preserve; to fight, yet to seek stillness; to walk the line between chaos and grace. The Ashikaga shogunate would eventually fade, its final shoguns reduced to figureheads amidst the fires they could no longer control. But from this chaos rose the seeds of something even greater, a new age of unity, ambition, and endless war. An era where the most powerful warlords in Japan would rise and fall like waves, where destiny would be decided not by birth, but by the strength of one sword. The Ashikaga are gone. The emperor is silent. The land lies broken, but awake. And from the smoke and silence, a new kind of warrior emerges, one who dreams not of serving the shogun, but of becoming one.
The Sengoku era had lasted nearly 150 years. It was an age of blood, brilliance, and transformation, when Japan was reforged not by peace, but by fire. And now, as the smoke clears, the land begins to heal under a single rule, the Tokugawa shogunate.
The year was 1603. The battlefield at Sekigahara was silent, its fields stained not with glory, but with memory. And in that silence, one man rose above all others. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient strategist, the man who had outlasted the storm. From his victory, a new order was born, a shogunate that would endure not for years, but for centuries. Ieyasu built his capital not in Kyoto, but in a small fishing village to the east, a place called Edo. From this quiet bay, he would forge an empire of peace. He knew what chaos had done to the land. He had seen temples burn, families vanish, and samurai lose their honor to endless war. So he sought to build something that would never break again, not through conquest, but through control. Under Tokugawa rule, Japan closed its doors to the world. The great ships that once came from China, Korea, and Europe were turned away. Foreign religion was outlawed, foreign weapons forbidden. For more than 200 years, Japan would live in isolation, a world preserved in stillness. But within that stillness, life took on new beauty. Edo grew from a fishing town into a vast and ordered city. Wooden streets lined with shops, gardens flowing with cherry blossoms, and quiet rivers that shimmered beneath the moon. Merchants traded, poets wrote, and the arts flourished under the peace that the sword had created. For the samurai, however, peace was both a blessing and a burden. Their swords were no longer needed in battle. Their armor gathered dust, but they still stood at the top of society as symbols of virtue, discipline, and honor. And so the warrior turned inward. The battlefield became the mind. The sword became philosophy. This was the age when Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not just lived, it was written. Scholars and swordsmen alike sought to define what it truly meant to be samurai in a world that no longer needed war. They taught restraint, courtesy, and humility. They spoke of loyalty to one's lord, to one's duty, and to one's own conscience. To die when honor demanded it, and to live with grace when it did not. Among these ideals rose a ritual that became both feared and revered, seppuku, the act of self-embowelment. It was not seen as despair, but as redemption, the ultimate proof of sincerity and courage. A man who had failed in life could still succeed in death by meeting it with calm and resolve. It was an age of silence, yet beneath that silence flowed a deep current of change. As the years passed, the once proud warriors became administrators, poets, and teachers. Their children grew up not with spears in their hands, but with brushes and scrolls. Still, they carried the spirit of their ancestors, that quiet dignity that could not be killed even by peace. For 250 years, the Tokugawa shogunate ruled over Japan with order so perfect it seemed eternal. Laws were strict, travel was limited, the classes were immovable: samurai, farmer, artisan, merchant. Each knew their place, each played their role. And yet, in the heart of Edo,
something new began to stir, a quiet yearning for freedom, for discovery, for the world beyond the sea. While the samurai polished their swords, the merchants grew wealthy. While the old codes demanded restraint, the cities pulsed with hidden life, the laughter of geisha, the glow of lanterns, and the poems written in secret. The Tokugawa peace was perfect on the surface, but underneath it was beginning to crack. Change was coming, not from within, but from across the horizon. Ships, black and foreign, would soon appear upon Japan's shores, and the world the samurai had built would tremble once again. For now, though, the land still sleeps, the rivers flow, the cherry blossoms fall, and the samurai, their blades resting in silence, dream of battles long past. They do not know it yet, but the next dawn will bring not another war between men, but a war between centuries.
For more than 2 centuries, Japan had slept under the watchful eye of the Tokugawa shoguns. The world beyond the horizon was forgotten, a dream sealed away behind walls of tradition and silence. But even the calmest sea cannot hold back the tide forever. In the summer of 1853, the tide finally turned. From the misty expanse of Edo Bay, 4 vast black ships appeared. Their smoke curled into the sky like dark clouds. Their cannons glimmered in the morning sun. The people who saw them whispered in fear. They called them Kurofune, the black ships. They came from a distant land called America, commanded by a man named Commodore Matthew Perry. He bore a message from the Western world, a demand that Japan open its ports and step into the modern age. The shogunate was unprepared. For generations, it had known only peace. Its warriors no longer fought wars. They administered taxes, taught calligraphy, and practiced swordsmanship as ritual, not survival. But now their world trembled. The foreigners brought machines that breathed fire, weapons that roared like thunder, and a power Japan could not ignore. Faced with this unstoppable force, the shogunate had no choice. In 1854, Japan opened its ports. Trade began. The world flooded in. And with it came questions the sword could not answer. For centuries, the samurai had lived by a code older than the nation itself: honor, duty, loyalty, restraint. But now the very structure of their existence began to crumble. Merchants, once beneath them, grew rich through foreign trade. Farmers found new markets, new opportunities. And the samurai, forbidden by law to work for profit, grew poorer each passing year. Their stipends shrank. Their swords became symbols, not tools. Yet even as the world moved forward, many refused to let go of the past. They clung to Bushido, to the memory of their ancestors,
to the belief that Japan's soul could not be bought or changed. Among them, voices began to rise. Expel the barbarians, restore the emperor. And so the old and the new collided. The emperor, long silent, became a symbol once more, a beacon for those who dreamed of a purer Japan. Young samurai, fiery and idealistic, took up their blades not against foreign invaders, but against their own government. The country was divided. Loyalists and shogunate forces clashed in the Boshin War of 1868. For the last time, samurai armor gleamed on the battlefield. For the last time, the code of Bushido roared across the land. But it was no longer enough. The rifles of the modern army, the cannons of the West, shattered centuries of tradition in a single generation. By the war's end, the shogunate fell. The emperor, young, determined, took the throne once again. His name was Meiji. And with him began a new era. The Meiji Restoration swept across Japan like wildfire. The class system was abolished, the sword was outlawed, and the samurai, once the masters of the nation, were no longer needed. Many found work as soldiers, teachers, officials. Others fell into poverty. Some, unable to accept the change, chose death over dishonor. Among these last warriors was Saigo Takamori, a man both loyal to the emperor and broken by the world he had created. He led a rebellion against the new order, the final stand of the samurai. In 1877, the hills of Satsuma echoed with gunfire and smoke. Thousands of samurai, armed with swords and courage, charged against rifles and artillery. It was not a battle. It was a farewell. When the rebellion was crushed, Saigo took his own life. His death marked the end of an age, the moment when history closed the book on the warrior class. Yet even in their fall, the samurai did not truly die. Their ideals, honor, loyalty, courage, became the heartbeat of modern Japan. Bushido lived on, not in the blade, but in the spirit of a nation reborn. Today, the word samurai no longer means soldier. It means something quieter, deeper, a way of living, a memory of strength balanced by grace, of power tempered by humility. The black ships are gone. The fires of rebellion have faded, and the warriors of old rest in the pages of history, their voices carried only by wind and ink. But if you stand beneath the falling cherry blossoms and listen carefully, you might still hear it, the echo of armor, the whisper of steel drawn in moonlight, the quiet breath of the samurai. The age of warriors has ended, but their spirit remains.
The samurai are gone. Their castles crumble into stone and moss. Their swords rest in glass cases. Their armor sleeps in museums.
Yet somehow, they never truly left. Their spirit lingers in the rhythm of the language, in the bow of respect, in the quiet pride of a people who remember. After the Meiji Restoration, Japan stepped into a new age. Railways cut across the mountains. Factories rose beside rivers that once ran through rice fields. The emperor became the symbol of a modern nation. And yet, beneath the hum of machines, beneath the suits and the steel, the pulse of Bushido still beat quietly. Schools taught not the art of the sword, but the art of perseverance. In business, in craft, in service, the ideals of the samurai transformed into something timeless. Honor became integrity. Discipline became diligence. Loyalty became devotion to one's work, one's family, one's country. The samurai had once ruled with their blades. Now they ruled with example. Their silence became a strength. Their restraint became elegance. Even the arts they once nurtured, the tea ceremony, calligraphy, flower arrangement, survived not as pastimes, but as living philosophies. Each gesture measured, each breath deliberate, each movement a quiet reminder that beauty lies in stillness. As Japan rose from the ashes of war in the 20th century, it carried that same spirit, the calm endurance of those who never yield. In every craftsman's hand, in every architect's precision, in every athlete's silent bow before a match, there is a trace of the old code. Bushido had become invisible, no longer bound by armor or sword, but woven into the soul of a people. And beyond Japan, the world watched in fascination. From Hollywood films to novels, from video games to philosophy, the image of the samurai, stoic, loyal, unbroken, became a mirror for humanity's search for meaning. What is it about them that endures? Perhaps it is their paradox, their balance between beauty and brutality, between humility and power. They remind us that strength is not only found in the strike of a blade, but in the control that holds it back. That honor is not pride, but purpose. That even in defeat, there can be peace. Today, in the cherry blossom that blooms and falls within a week, we see what the samurai once understood, that life is fleeting, and in that impermanence lies its beauty. A samurai's life was a poem written in the space between two breaths, short but eternal. And so their story never truly ends. It flows through time like a river, from the horsemen of Heian to the shoguns of Kamakura, to the dreamers of Edo, to the silent spirits who walk today's streets in shadow. Their swords may rest, their castles may crumble, but their legacy, their way,
still whispers through the world. In courage, in loyalty, in the calm pursuit of perfection. This is the spirit of the samurai, not a memory, but a mirror, reflecting who we are and who we strive to be. The story of the samurai is not one of war, but of humanity, the endless struggle to live with honor in a changing world.